Let's start from the beginning. Let's remind ourselves what we're doing here. We're talking about prayer, tefillah, but actually the word prayer is not the best English word to use for what we're trying to describe. Because while tefillah contains some elements of prayer, it isn't exclusively prayer. Prayer means to ask something of someone more powerful than you. That's what prayer means. So tefillah does include some of that, but in a sense, it's deeper than that. Rav Kook, famous Jewish thinker, who lived at in the early 20th century, first half of the 20th century, in Eretz Yisrael. He writes that prayer, or I should say more appropriately, tefillah, is the work of the human being to achieve his or her full spiritual wholeness. He goes on to say that even if a person were to quote unquote pray and never have his prayer granted and not have what he asks of God given to him, that in no way detracts from the value of the prayer. Because the ultimate value, the ultimate purpose in the prayer, in the tefillah, is to develop that closeness with the divine reality, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to incorporate oneself, this is my kind of paraphrasing, to incorporate oneself into the divine reality. So that this occasion of the work, let's just call it the avodah shebelev, the work of the heart that one engages during prayer, during tefillah, is the primary value of that is in the relationship that forms between the individual and God. And in a sense, it seems to me that not only is the granting of one's requests secondary to that, but at this stage in the ladder, in the first stages of the ladder, it's actually detracting from that closeness. As until we can properly understand the place of prayer requests in our avodah shebelev, in the service, in the work of the heart, in the spiritual labor of prayer, it seems that our requests are contradictory. That is to say, just let's look at the first prayer that we say, that we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. When we say the words Modeh ani lefanecha, I am grateful to you, or I humbly submit before you, living and eternal King, that you have granted me life. Well, if you're going on to ask for something, then that is kind of a contradictory experience of that, right? Asking from God, asking something of God isn't that mode of humbly submitting oneself in gratitude. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of reinforce this idea that what we're talking about here is the guided meditation that is the daily prayers, the Siddur, whose purpose is ultimately to forge the deepest possible relationship between the human being and God, the divine reality. And we talked about the ladder of prayer described by the Arizal, and we have the first three steps of the ladder that we described, which are, he says it goes through the divine worlds of Asiya, the lowest world, which is the world of action. Yetzirah, the next world on the ladder, which is the world of emotion, the emotional experience, which when you think about emotions, emotions are fundamentally an experience of self, how the other makes me feel. So while Yetzirah, while emotions are fundamentally about relationships, but the emotional aspect of the relationship is how my proximity to the other is experienced by me. And therefore, the Yetzirah world, or the Yetzirah world is characterized by an experience of self. And then we go to the next world of Beriah, which is a true awareness of the other, kind of being in the mindset that in which my mind is directed to the wonderment regarding the other. This is in our work of prayer, we begin by acknowledging. The majesty, the might of God. We then go on to cultivate in ourselves an awareness of admiration, of a sense of the inner experience of what it's like to be in this world led by God. And then finally, we want to come to a higher level in which we are connecting more to the neshama, to the part of us that is spiritually oriented towards the divine reality. So that's the big picture of most of the journey of the tefillah work, is that we are beginning with acknowledging. And again, acknowledging is not something which comes from within. Let's say when you acknowledge something, it's a reality that is imposed from the outside. I have to agree. So it's not my idea. If I agree, it's not yet my idea. It's an idea that I am kind of accepting. I'm accepting it, but it's not flowing from within. Okay, then we're going to go that's the prayer. That's the first step of the prayer. So let's say the first step of the prayer in the morning involves the modani, in which we say, in which we direct our attention to the fact that while we feel that we're alive, we also feel that our life isn't in our control. And so that's the first 50, 60 pages in the Siddur, much of which, not everyone, people tend to skip over those. It includes the morning blessings, which are very important, in which we get into our body and we experience the various gifts and the workings of our body. Again, this is not something that we naturally experience, but when we direct our attention to it, we become aware of it. So we're aware that there's a power outside of us that is ultimately directing our life. So that's acknowledging, it's accepting, it's turning our attention to a reality that isn't innate and that isn't natural to us, even though it is logical. This is the world of Asiya. It also includes the sacrifices, which represent the work that the Jewish people do to be in service and submission and humility before God. All of these ideas in which we're taking so largely, broadly, the service of the sacrifices is symbolically along those lines, but even to the specifics of the symbolism, the slaying of the animal, the sacrifice, the slaughtering of the animal suggests that the animal is incompatible with the divine reality. The animal has to be sacrificed, has to be burned up. It's a contradiction to the service of God. And the service of God is the killing of the animal, is the slaughtering of the animal in that sense, because the animal is problematic. And this is kind of what we do when we direct our attention to the body and we say, well, this body didn't make itself, this body doesn't control itself, this body requires God's grace, God's gift, God's beneficence in order that I could exist at all, right? And that's the Birchos HaShachar, that's the morning blessings, that's the blessing, the order of the sacrifices, that's there are other beautiful prayers that are in that section, like we discussed in a couple weeks back. You were the one before the world was created, you were the one after the world was created. This idea that the power of God overwhelms the natural reality, the worldly reality. Then we go to the next step, which is Yetzirah, the experience of self. And that begins, Yetzirah, the world of Yetzirah, the experience of self, or the world of emotions, generally understood to be the world of emotions. That is, and there we're going now to try and train our consciousness itself, to try and find within our heart that we should not only accept and submit to the greater power of God, but that the heart itself should learn, have its own expression with regards to God. And that's where we go into the hallelujahs, right? The praising of God. And that when we reflect on the natural world, on the awesomeness of the natural world, the beauty of the natural world, the experiences that we have had in which we see the hand of God, and how do I feel about that? What feelings does that elicit in me? That is, that's then the world of Yetzirah, the world of emotion, the experience of self. And there we're going more into the realm of admiration. We're eliciting in our heart an admiration for the divine quality. Remember, this is different than the acknowledging. In the acknowledging, there's a conflict between the natural human experience, and I'm recognizing, I'm drawing my attention to the fact that there's a power that controls that human experience. Now we're beginning to leverage the human experience itself into a sense of admiration and a sense of wonderment before Hashem. Now, the prayer that opens this up, or the meditation that opens this up, is Baruch She'amar. And for this, we're going to need the siddurs. Okay? Baruch She'amar is the kind of introductory prayer to the introductory meditation to this process. And it helps us to orient ourselves to how we should be thinking about these praises.
I grab one or I grab three.
Thank you. Baruch She'amar in the Hebrew English Art Scroll Siddur is on page 58 and 59. And these words, Baruch She'amar v'haya ha'olam, mark that transition. From there on, we're reflecting on things that are very intuitive to us. Blessed is the one who has mercy on the land. Blessed is the one who has mercy on the creatures. Blessed is the one who gives goodly reward to those who fear him. Blessed is the one who lives forever. Right? We have this awareness of the hand, the wonderment here, already turning to the wonderment. But the first words, Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam, blessed is the one who spoke, and the world came into being, are very, very deep words. And one can meditate on these words for a long, long time. It tells us that the world comes into being, is the coming into being, the emerging of the world. And by the world, we mean the worldly reality. Remember our very first, I guess we should go back and just remember the very first introduction with which we started this whole conversation a few weeks ago, was the problem with the word God, right? The problem with the word God is that it leads us to think of a being, right, that is outside of us. Unawareness is not even a worldly reality. There's no consciousness there. But even in awareness, there's a worldly awareness, and then there's a godly awareness. The worldly awareness says that there is a reality, a natural world, and that it's directed by a godly reality. That's the Asiya mentality, in which we say, you are the living king, and you bestowed life onto me, right? That there is this kind of power, a godly power. We're trying to move away from that and move into a more broad and all-encompassing and deeper description of reality, one that says that that all of reality, everything, is a manifestation of divine will, and even exists within, can't even say it's inseparable from the divine reality. It is a divine reality. It is still within the infinity of God, right? So here we begin to train our mind to become aware, to think in those terms. And in order to do that, we explain how the worldly reality came into being. And we use the term amira, speaking, to describe that. Why do we use the word speech to describe the creation? So, well, there are other ways of referring to creation. As a matter of fact, in the world of Yetzirah, we could say, blessed is the one who formed the world, right? Blessed is the one who conceived of the world.
So what is speech made out of?
So now I want to talk about not the kinetics of speech, but I want to talk about, because of course, no, I want to talk about the articulative power, right? Let me explain what I mean. Of course, when we say speech in terms of the divine, God has no physical form, right? So you can't limit God in that sense to say that God speaks to someone outside of him using faculties, bodily faculties. I want to talk on a deeper sense of what happens when we speak, meaning what happens when we turn our thoughts into words. That's what I'm talking about. The articulative power is the human endeavor of taking our inclinations, of taking the things that we care about, of taking the things that are important to us, taking ideas that are interesting to us, and putting them into words. Now, what are words? Words are symbols. The word apple has nothing to do with an actual apple. The word apple is made up of letters and their sounds. Even the utterance apple in no way indicates what an apple is. As a matter of fact, it's also possible for you even to know. So if you didn't know English and I said the word apple, you would have no idea what I'm talking about. But even if you do know English and I said apple, you wouldn't know if I was referring to a food or I was referring to a computer. And how is it possible that a computer could be called an apple, and an apple and a fruit could be called an apple, and it's the same word, right? Because in reality, there is no inherent connection. There's no inherent relationship between the word and the thing that it's describing. And therefore, at the same time, words have a very powerful, at the same time, if you do understand the meanings of the word, then they convey the fullness of an idea. The magic of the word apple is that I can picture in my mind an apple, and I can encode it into the word apple, say it to you. If you listen to what I said, if you pay attention to what I said, and you use your decoder, which is your knowledge of the English language, you can then translate that word apple, which you heard me say, into a picture in your own mind of an actual apple. The truth is another way of seeing this is that language has the capacity to create conflict at the same time that it creates connection. I should probably say linguistics instead of speech. Okay. Sorry about that. Language. Yeah.
Language
Yeah.
pulls you from one norm to another.
So we can. One of the amazing things about language is that it has the power to connect people or divide people, and that really has a lot to do with our ability to encode effectively and to decode effectively. Expire. Yeah. Yeah.
What is it?
I said, just think of the word that they were exchanging when he said expire, and that elicited
Right.
a
Yeah.
visceral reaction. Well, so
Right.
my mother passed away years. I mean, I have a different effect than even other people.
Yeah. Right. And and so that's a good also point that there is a lot of the decoding of language has to do with the baggage that you carry along with that language, the meaning that it has for you personally, the associations that it brings up for you. So in this way, now we can talk about, not with this kind of general introduction of the meaning of language, we can now maybe understand why, what might be indicated by referring to creation as being God's speech. God's speech, this is to say that the world, it's nothing, let's follow through the thought. The entire world, we want to say like this, start again from the beginning of our introduction of God. Jewish teaching says that God is Ein Sof, infinity. And when we say infinity, that means there is no place devoid of him. And that means then that we are currently standing in the presence of God. And everything that we look at is really a manifestation of God. And we ourselves, well, that's for later. But at least at this stage, we're not ready. At this part of the morning, this part of the service, we're not ready to necessarily experience ourselves that way. But because remember, the point of this isn't to think about God philosophically. It's to experience God, to experience the divine reality in an authentic way. And in order to do it authentically, you can't rush through it. And you can't start at the end. You can't start with the high idea. You have to tease your mind into it so that it's authentic. You have to work through from your first external awareness and through that to go deeper and deeper into your consciousness. So again, everything is the infinity of the divine. God is infinite, that means God is right here. And everything I'm looking at is truly a manifestation of God. And everything that happens to me is a manifestation of God. Because there's nowhere without him. So then how do I understand that I look around the world and I see things? More than just things. I experience conflict. I experience individuals. The most opposite thing to the divine reality is the experience of individualism. Which in a sense, going back to Asiya, that's what characterizes the world of Asiya. And we're trying to get out of the world of Asiya and trying to get into the world of Yetzirah. We're trying to get out of the world of things and get into the world of understanding that the whole world is formed by God. So how do we understand? How can we not break? We want to not break, not challenge our experience of separateness within ourselves and other things, not deny the reality that we see right in front of us, but to help us perceive it for what it really is. So the most powerful mashal, the most powerful analogy that we can give to open up our perception is to say, think about language, in which the word apple is a separate thing. It's dead letters. By dead, I mean they have no inherent meaning. They have no, because if they had inherent meaning, then when you said the word, everyone would know what you meant, whether they understood the language or not. And they would know if you mean a computer or a fruit, right? So the words themselves are dead. They're separate. And yet they evoke, if you have the right awareness, if you have the right clarity, if you have the right decoder, you can recognize that what appeared to be separate and meaningless is actually a facilitator of meaning.
The issue, it's not an issue, it's the thing to overcome. Hashem is and so she is. How do you get closer to something that is intangible? Okay,
so the question was, if the problem is that the infinite, right, the infinite, Ein Sof, is something with which we cannot have a relationship, because a relationship requires some degree of separateness. Two separate beings that will have a relationship with each other.
Right. Coded and decoded for speech.
The code and so
there's no decoder
So right. So if there's
Correct.
in true infinity, there's no, in true essence, there's no, okay. This is the miracle of creation, actually, right? The miracle of creation. But okay, this is why we're saying that there is creation. Creation. Some students of Kabbalah would say that the world is an illusion. I'm not saying that the world is an illusion. I'm saying that the world is real, but that the world, the real reality of the world, is still fundamentally divine reality. Just like the letters apple don't mean fruit, and yet they do mean fruit. Okay, so hold the thought. Robin has a question. Then I'll turn to the online participants and see if they have any questions, and then I think my own thoughts will be clearer to myself. Yeah, Robin, what do you got?
But it says, we know God didn't say because he's not a body with a voice box and a tongue, so he couldn't say. Why does he continuously give human traits to a God? Because then we create an image of a person.
Okay, the question was, why would we use the human traits when we're trying to describe God? The problem of that, there's a big problem with that, as you point out, that it leads us to the personified descriptions of God, person-like descriptions of God, which, you know, for somebody who doesn't get out of this representational thinking, who doesn't get out of this symbolic thinking, they can end up with some very wrong ideas, right? So that's why it's important not to stop at Baruch She'amar, and we have to get to the end of the davening, which we're going to work on over time. But the risk, the benefit is worth the risk. The benefit is that we'll come to an authentic understanding through the things that we know personally. Meaning, let's just say this. I know that I'm speaking in abstracts right now. And speaking in abstracts are very hard to understand, right? It's hard to decode abstract words. But imagine if I wasn't even using these abstract words. Imagine if I was just speaking in purely spiritual terms. It would be impossible. So we want to work within the consciousness that we have and to use our consciousness to understand a higher reality. And there's one more point, which is that the fact that human speech exists is a product. By speech, you're a speech therapist, so I have to be specific in my terms. The fact that human language, linguistics exists, is a product of the way reality emerged. The way the worldly reality emerged from the divine infinity. Meaning the worldly reality emerged from the divine infinity in this speech-like dynamic, and in creation we will see that speech-like dynamic reflected in human language. So it's actually it's not only a mushal, it's not only an analogy. Human speech is not only an analogy for creation, it is actually an iteration of creation. You know what iteration means? It's another way this idea, this dynamic, this creational dynamic plays out.
It's an apparition and causality. If you look at the verbiage.
Okay, but I'm still in the mushal, John. I'm still sitting in the mushal. I know. We're not there yet.
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, speech is comprised of frequencies, all right? Low, medium, and high. That's what speech sounds are. When you run them on a sonogram, all right, let's say 1500 hertz, okay, and 100 people. Those 100 people are going to perceive, let's say, the sound of a cup, okay? And then they say, oh, with this many 1,500 hertz per second, frequencies per second. That sounds just like the sound of. So we can physiologically assign a sound and it can become a letter. So I'm taking it further or one step back, that when we say God spoke, he assigned all these different frequencies, okay, into his realm. All right. When it came down to us, it sounded like speech.
Let me see if I hear you right. You're saying that when a person speaks, they
Speech is made up of
articulate tones. Each tone has its own frequency. For example, high, medium, low. Each one has its own hertz, the vibrations of the sound that it generates. And we, in speaking, copy the frequencies that we hear.
We assign meaning, okay.
And we
to certain
assign meaning to
sounds,
those sounds.
all right, and those sounds correlate to certain frequencies.
Well, those sounds are those frequencies.
Right, so which came first? Okay, so but I'm saying where it started, how do we assign what an plosive is? Because we tested people and they heard this when it's a.
So you're saying that creation includes those frequencies.
I believe so.
It does. It's a reality. Of course it.
when they
Who
say-
else made those sounds? If not, who else made? Okay, fine. I want you to get out of the body thinking for a moment, and because this, for example, Sefer Yetzirah, one of the first books of the Kabbalah, the opening passages with 3 books or with 3 sefarim, God created the world. With the Sofer, the scribe, the Sefer, the book, the Sipur, and the story. Right? So this, again, goes back to this idea of the speech, but the Sefer Yetzirah says, don't get caught up in the audiological aspects of speech. Understand that speech exists in 3 different, and not speech, but linguistics. You've got to correct me. Every time I say speech, you should hear linguistics. Linguistics exists in 3 places. It exists in the mind of the scribe. It exists in the book, and by the book, that would mean the audiological manifestations of that story. And Sipur is the spirit that is being expressed from the mind of the scribe into the encoding into the audiological or written word, or even sign language sign language is also amira, is also speech in this sense. So, right? And ultimately it's trying to convey the sipur, the story, which is the spirit that underlies all of it. Okay? So you understand so what you're saying is,
Okay.
right, so what you're saying is what the physiological things that you're pointing out are interesting and true, but that's only one place, that's only one area in which this dynamic plays out.
Okay, so it's a 3rd. And the last one is the story itself.
Yeah. Okay, and even the story itself, is has a meaning. You could say that the words, the story in relation to the words are like a spirit to a body, right? The words, and then the words are conveying an event, right? The event are not words, right? The chicken crossed the road. So there's the fricatives and the plosives and all the things and all the frequencies that go into that, or the written words that go into that, right? Though that's the sefer, right? That's the symbological manifestations of that story. Then you have the event which occurred in which a chicken actually crossed the road, and we're reimagining that thing. But then there's a deeper thing in the story. Even the story is not the end of the story. The real deeper thing is, why did the chicken cross the road? What was the chicken after in crossing the road? So that's a soul within a soul. And then we have an even deeper reality in that, which is like, there's some
Or is the chicken even there?
The chicken is right. There's
Is the chicken even there?
there's some spiritual, there's some kind of eternal truth in well, there's also an eternal truth in the journey of a chicken across the road. There's an eternal truth of the right that in which no, so I'm saying it depends where. In the word chicken, the chicken is not a chicken. In the story of the chicken is only a chicken. In the meaning of the chicken is a representation of an eternal truth. What is the eternal truth of a chicken crossing the road? It is that a thing need not be necessarily where it is. We can have a quest. We have the potential to hope. We have the hope. We have the potential to go beyond our current place, right? We have the potential to attain. We have the potential to be curious, right? And these things are fundamental to all reality, meaning all of us at some point in our life is a chicken crossing the road. And we can be questioning why, and we can discover things. I mean, this is something fundamental to the whole world. So you have, so do you want to say all the things about the chicken of the chicken? We start off with reality itself. So let's go like this. Huh?
That makes any sense.
Huh?
Without speech, none of that makes
Without
any
speech,
sense.
none of this makes any sense. But also, without linguistics, not only does this whole spiel that I just gave not make sense, but there's no way to share the eternal truth. So in this reality, through linguistics, through this messy, concealing, problematic, confusing, multi-layered, and often problematic and often conflict-bearing procedure of encoding into linguistics, we have the ability to convey eternal truths, to share them with each other, to carry them over time, to store them for later, right? There's something so beautiful, something so eternal about this. So this is the paradox of speech, is that speech on the one hand represents the concealment, represents the encoding of the divine presence, but it also, at the same time, allows the sharing of the divine presence. It allows us to store, to share, and in this case, for the human being who's waking up in the morning, it allows me to go a little deeper and to become aware of a divine reality while I'm still waking up. And so what is this? It's me going. So now let's get into the business of the thing. Now we're going to go to the admiration part, okay? How would I know as a human being that language, if I landed from, or let's say as I was born, right? A baby is born. Now you, Robin, could probably speak to this very well, but I'm gonna make a layman's attempt at this, okay? How does a baby begin to understand that language is significant? Right? The baby doesn't know. What does a baby know of language? Not able to speak, doesn't know the meaning of words, right? But what we experience as babies, if I could remember correctly,
energy of the words, energy.
Energy. So a few things we see. First of all, it's consistent.
First of all, the auditory feedback loop develops at 4 months of age. That's when kids start babbling and cooing.
Okay, but I'm talking about the experience of language, right?
They don't.
Robin, go with me for a minute. Okay, what happens? First thing we see is patterns, right? You hear certain sounds over and over again. You hear them with some kind of consistency, with some kind of repetition, and you recognize that these sounds are not random, right? So this is maybe a little step beyond the auditory loop. We recognize that there's not randomness to this because it's happening over and over. There's the same sounds repeated and repeated. The other thing is what Irina said is that we also begin to associate there's beauty in words, there's emotions in words, there's spirit in words. So the people, the adults who surround this child are saying sounds, and together with that sound, they see beautiful faces, they see angry faces, they see sad faces.
Pleasure and pain.
Okay, that's on the most rudimentary level. No, that's on the most rudimentary level. I'm going a little beyond that. I'm saying, right, there are all kinds of emotions and spirits and things that we experience, right?
Babies attempt to speak. Okay.
Oh, and the okay, that's I'm not talking about the reproduction of language, because here we're talking about receiving God's language. We're not talking about us speaking back to God yet. We haven't gotten to that yet, right here. It's just intelliging, understanding that language is intelligible, right? So the first step in understanding language intelligible is seeing patterns. The second thing in seeing in understanding that language is intelligible is seeing beauty, is seeing emotion, is seeing, and that's where we get to the world of Yitzhira, right? Emotion, spirit, feelings, and that's the thing that we begin to associate the sounds with certain feelings. Okay, so when we can go back to our world, to our worldview, and when we look around the world and we see order in the world, we see harmony, we see the harmony of nature, the harmoniousness of nature, and we also are able to see the awesomeness of nature. There's kind of emotional inputs that come from nature, the beauty of nature, the power of nature, which of course, in turn will evoke feelings in us of vulnerability or of awe or of inspiration or of yearning, right? These are feelings which we will encounter in the context of this language. And this leads us then to be aware that this is not just things, this is a story. This is divine language. And then when but this introduction of Baruch She'amar is here to say, we are going to decode, as in understand. We're approaching our experience of nature with the intention of being aware that it is like divine speech. That is, it's God's heart. It's God's will, God's intent encoded into words. And just like words, just like language, when properly understood, is not a concealment, is not a vessel, right? So in Kabbalistic language, we use the term vessel. And again, we can get caught up in the dichotomy between vessel and light. But here we're talking about it's not just something that contains the light. It is actually a manifestation of the divine will, of the divine intent, and divine love, right? So we're looking at the world around us and understanding that all that we see is divine will encoded. It's divine will, divine love encoded. And we'll see that as we go through the rest of the prayer. We talk about God's mercy, right? We see order, we see hashgacha pratis, we see divine providence, we see later on in the other ones. We're going to go from here on, we can go all along into all of the prayers, and we could see in all the praises, we could say, praise God from the heavens, praise God from the earth, praise God his, the young, the old, and then later on we'll talk about history and see the order that exists in history, right? All of these, going back to this idea of the way the baby learns, the baby appreciates language, not learns language, but appreciates language, is in seeing the order and in seeing the beauty. And so we look around the world, we see the order, we see the beauty, and we have already declared our intention from the outset that we are going to be looking for this order and looking for this beauty in order to become aware that all of this is not just God's creation. It's not just things made by God. It's not things made by God, which is the way we would think in the mindset of Asiya, Rather, it is divine will encoded. It's still God. It's still God, right? This is the difference between something made by God and something which is still God. And this is the difference between human speech, and here I say speech, and divine language, divine speech. Because in human speech, I encode words and I utter them to somebody outside of me. But since the Ein Sof is truly infinite, since the divine reality is an infinite reality, so those words never truly leave God. So the encoding is an encoding within the divine reality. We're still within God. We're still in the presence of God. All of this is an encoding in God. It's an encoded way of experiencing God, experiencing the presence of God, experiencing the presence of the divine. You understand a little bit more what I'm saying?
So we're trying to decode.
We're trying to decode the reality that we see and to understand that it is actually divine emanations, divine energies. So the admiration is the key. It's the open door. It's the crack of light. It's the glittering that catches our attention. When we see a sunrise, how beautiful it is. When we hear the chirping birds, and we realize they wake up every morning on time, not like me. And when we see that every animal gets its food, and we see that we contemplate the precipitation system and how the clouds go up, become rain, and how they come down, and how all of this emerges, right? This glitters, and it makes us inspired. It makes us admire. And then we realize that, like the baby identifying language, we realize that this is something to pay attention to. Yeah.
That's not
a admiration.
The Baruch Shamar is
being able to see through that.
No, I wouldn't say it that way. I would say that the Baruch Shamar is a declaration of intent to go. Right, it's a declaration of intent to go ahead and admire.
I was going to say, appreciate all the things you just described.
Yeah, to go ahead and admire the wonder of nature,
right. And
in so doing, to recognize that admiration which we have for the beauty of nature should be a finger that points us towards what it truly is, like the baby who hears these repetitive sounds in order and also sees that they come with some meaningfulness, that it makes us realize this is something I need to decode. I need to understand this is divine reality and not just it is what it is.
But admiration is a form of acknowledgement.
The difference between admiration and acknowledgement is that admiration comes with some excitement.
Yeah.
And acknowledgement comes with humility.
A bit of a conclusion, like I'm appreciating something.
Yeah, you're appreciating. You don't celebrate when you're acknowledging. You celebrate when you're admiring. Right? There's the difference between yes, sir, and wow, sir. Right? The Moda'ani is yes, sir. And Baruch She'amar tells me, get ready to say wow.
I think that's part of but that admiration also is the inner voice acknowledging this to be the case. There has to be some level, so you acknowledge, as you said, but admiration is already, I'm seeing a bit of the awe of this thing. Like there's
yeah, so we're working through this. So this one step leads to the other. Right. So I want to make sure I heard you correctly. You're saying that the admiration, that the acknowledgement leads itself towards the admiration. Yes. So the Asiya, as we climb higher and higher into the Asiya world, it ultimately translates into the Yetzira world, such that the Chokhmah of Asiya leads to the Malchut of Yetzira. Right. That is, the bottom part of the lower world is intertwined with the top part of the lower world is intertwined with the bottom part of the lower world. So just to speak about that in more English words, by thinking about the fact, by opening our mind up, within the facts of life, which is the acknowledgement of the facts of life, the undeniable facts of life. I woke up in the morning, I had to go to the bathroom, and I went. And that is an undeniable fact of life. And then I have to, that leads me then to recognize my vulnerability, and it leads me to recognize that the fact is that I don't control my life. That's a fact. As I think deeper into that, it leads me into the Baruch Sha'amar. It leads me into the admiration. Yes, so we're moving. Well, the animal. Well, let's say like this. We spoke a little bit in the beginning about this, the korbanot, the sacrifices, which are at the very beginning of the prayer. And in this sense, in the asiya, in the lowest realm, there's a conflict between the animal and the soul, so to speak. In the Beriah, in the Yetzirah world, in the admiring world, the animal begins to become a way in which we can admire, in which we can become aware of the divine order of life. So, we don't say Asher Yatzar, we don't say, we don't refer to our bodily function explicitly so much in this portion of the prayers, which, by the way, goes, the Yetzirah portion of the prayers goes essentially until Yishtabach, where we say the blessings of the Shema, is we're already moving into the higher level, which we'll talk about next time, Bez Hashem. But if we were to say Asher Yatz, if we were to say a prayer like Asher Yatzar in the second stage of the ladder, we would be not acknowledging our vulnerability. We would be in wonderment we would be saying wow, right? But in the morning, we're not ready to say wow yet. That's not authentic in the morning. At least I know for myself, I can just speak for myself. When I wake up, some people say, I wake up in the morning and I say, wow, another day. I don't have that experience. Right? In the morning, I'm groggy, but we can turn that grogginess actually into an authentic expression. And then as we wake up a little more, we have a different authentic expression.
So the
That's,
other language you're speaking about is human language.
I am only speaking about, I'm speaking about human language as,
Prayer. Through prayer, not divine language.
Well, what I want to say is that the existence of the world is divine language. All of the things that we see is like words, like what words are to the heart, what human language is to the human heart, which is actually the way in which they're real feelings. And I want to say one more point about words, which is that when we feel something, we can feel it. Then we talk about it, all of a sudden we feel stronger. Why is it that when I talk about how much I miss someone, all of a sudden I start crying. I didn't miss them before. But not only do words encode the feelings, but words actually give extra life to the feelings. Yeah. Yes. So what I want to say is that when you're talking about the language, human language, divine language, all of this world is what human language is to human emotion. The world is to God's love and God's intention.
Perfect segue to a question.
Okay.
Acknowledgement has a connotation. I could see at that stage, half asleep, admiration, probably not the first for me. If we get to this point, there is a sense when you use the word admiration that elicits a response on how I would feel if let's face it, I do admire it. So I'm personalizing and I'm internalizing, probably not the best thing to do either, but there is a sense for all of us what admiration would feel like. And then in the presence of Hashem, since he's everywhere, if I'm not feeling that level of admiration, do you recommend, is there a way to do you go back or do you kind of work
Mm.
with how you feel? Now I'm talking practically.
Right.
I
So
guess.
practically speaking, I think we have to work through maybe going through some of those prayers and look at some meditations that we can do. So I hear you. What I hear you saying is that sometimes we say the words and we're not connected,
Yeah,
and we're not bringing out it. All these words don't necessarily bring that sense of wow that we're supposed to have.
exactly.
Okay.
Well said.
Okay. So, all right.
I can get around it. I mean, I can
Yeah,
work with it, but
so I'll just say two answers very briefly, and then we'll close up for the night. The answer number one is that that this is why we prepare for prayer, and to roll out. So even though I'm describing here a program that should work on its own, but the Talmud tells us that that's not how the rabbis did it. That's not how the early Hasidim did it. They would prepare their minds. They would remove distractions. They would think. They would clear their minds. They would open their minds up to divine reality. They would think about, what am I going to think about? They would prepare their minds with intentions. They would give themselves content to pray over, right? So there's a lot of work involved in this. This is just describing the skeleton, the bones of the idea, but we have to pour a lot more into it in order for it to be meaningful. And this requires learning, and it requires meditation, it requires time. And then finally, the second answer is that, look, real life is real life. And, it's called avoda shebelev. It's called work, labor, not art. Because it's not about the art of prayer, or the skill of prayer, in which you have to do it right. It's a constant endeavor to move closer. And sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't, but as long as we're in the game, we can win. Okay, thank you so much for joining us, and have a good one.